Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today we are looking at the 3.5 D&D Ranger as we continue our series on the Ranger class through the ages. This is the fourth installment looking at D&D 3.5. I was tempted to call this Through the Ages episode 3.5, but I think that would be a little too on the nose. But I'm really excited for this one because I mentioned in the past that the Ranger class is my favorite in the game, and this is the version of the class that is the reason that the Ranger is my favorite fantasy RPG class, and especially my favorite D&D class. So I'm really looking forward to diving into this. I'll talk a bit more about my personal feelings towards the class at the end of the video, but we're going to take a look at the features provided in the player's handbook. As well, we have 3 other books that introduce alternate class features, and we're going to go through those in the order that they were released, but there's a lot of great stuff here. If you're not aware of the reason that 3.5 is even a thing, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but essentially 3.0 was, I'm not going to say it was rushed, but it definitely wasn't as thoroughly play tested as it probably should have been. A lot of issues with the game would start to crop up as the player characters progressed into higher and higher levels. The game designers even admitted that they really didn't play test much beyond 10th level, but also some of the classes were just really poorly designed, and the Ranger is essentially the poster child of poorly thought out 3.0 classes. The almost all of their abilities are gained at first level, and a lot of people would simply take Ranger as their first level class, and then they would multi-class into something else. Something that could take advantage of the limited armor proficiencies and get the use of the 2-weapon fighting feature, which is really essentially all that they wanted. So it just wasn't a great class. I think in my 3.0 video, if I recall correctly, the thing that I sort of mentioned is there were some great ideas, but just poor execution. And today we're going to actually see how they improved with some feedback and with the benefit of hindsight. So when 3.5 was announced, one of the major focuses was the fact that they had altered things to make them more balanced or just better overall. And nothing in 3.5 was more drastically changed than the Ranger class. The Ranger in 3.5 is essentially a from the ground up complete and total redesign. There's next to nothing that they have in common or similar, like the same exact abilities as the 3.0 Ranger. So it's the most drastically changed thing from 3.0 to 3.5, and it was the deciding factor for me to actually buy 3.5. I remember being completely like ambivalent towards it, not really angry at it, but just having no interest in it. And then when the owner of my local game store, as he was unpacking his order, I started flipping through a copy of the player's handbook. I looked at the Ranger class and I was so enamored with it. It's like, okay, I want this book now. And there was no looking back. It was the beginning of the trend of me saying I'm not going to be getting the new edition of the game, and then eventually going all in. So there you go. That's my weakness when it comes to RPGs, I guess. But anyway, let's take a look at the Ranger class starting on page 46 of the player's handbook. So for some of the similarities that they had with the 3.0 version of the class, again, you can be any race in 3rd edition and 3.5 and take any class. There are no longer any restrictions there. The Ranger is also no longer bound by any alignment restrictions. So in 1st and 2nd edition, they had to be good aligned. In 3rd edition, 3.5, they could have any alignment, even being evil, which is rare, but it is something that is supported now by the rules. And that's kind of where, like I said, the similarities kind of end, or there's only a few things left that's pretty much the same between 3.5 and 3.0. If we take a look at the progression chart here, we can actually see that the Ranger in 3.5 gets a lot more abilities now. It's not all given to them at first level with just new favorite enemies being added later on. They actually get new abilities every level up to 11th, and then it starts to space out a little bit more, but they're still pretty much getting good stuff at almost every single level that they progress through. They also now gain 2 good saving throws. So in 3.0, they had a good fortitude save, and that was it. In 3.5, they're good at fortitude and reflex, which goes with the really strong theme of the ranger being a more agile, maneuverable type of class compared to the fighter or the paladin. Also, their hit dice has been changed, so because they're sort of not meant to be quite as tough as the other classes, they're meant to, again, to focus more on stealth and maneuvering or attacking from a distance, more or less. They actually are back to using d8s for hit dice now, which is a nice callback to the first edition version of the Ranger class, which also rolled d8s. However, they only gain 1 of these at first level, unlike the first edition Ranger. But it is cool to see kind of the callback to that early version with them getting the d8s. They also have their skill points expanded now, so they have 6 skill points plus their intelligence modifier per level, as opposed to 3.0 where they gained 4 skill points plus their intelligence modifier. Although, like, when 3.0, they really didn't have enough skill points to do the things that the class is described as being able to do. The ranger is sort of meant to be a scout, they're meant to be a tracker, and they're sort of hinted at being really good with, like, herbalism or natural medicine. But with only 4 skill points, there were things that would have to be somewhat lacking in 3.0. Because for stealth, you had both hide and move silently, so that's 2 skills there. For perception, you had spot and listen, which again, you would want to have both of those because you usually get called on to roll both, or you just don't want to be in a situation where you're caught unprepared. So that was 4 skill points there in of itself, and if you wanted to track, that also used another skill, and if you wanted to be good with sort of herbalistic medicine, that would be another skill on top of it. So the 3.5 Ranger can do those 6 things by default with only a 10 intelligence. If they have a high modifier for intelligence, then they just simply get to add extra skills on there. So overall, a very good change for the class. Another change to the class that I am completely and totally on board with is the fact that their proficiencies have finally been changed to reflect the abilities that the class gets. Now, as far as weapons are concerned, they're still proficient with both simple and martial weapons. That hasn't changed. They're as good with weapons as any other fighter type class. But for armor, they are proficient in shields, which very few people that I know of playing Rangers ever really used. It is an option, and it does make sense if we take a look at another feature that they're going to gain here that's new to 3.5 in a moment. But they are proficient with shields, but they're no longer proficient with medium or heavier armors. So they are proficient in all light armor, which makes sense because their class features are usable if they're wearing light or no armor. So they are no longer given an armor proficiency that they'll actually be penalized for using. In 3.0, you're proficient with medium armor as a ranger, but if you wore it, you lost your 2-weapon fighting ability, which was one of the main features for the class. So they finally removed the proficiencies for armors that they would lose class features if they actually wore. And I cannot tell you, like, honestly, that was the moment. Reading that little section here, armor and weapon proficiency, this was the reason I went all in on 3.5, as crazy as that sounds. So a really great change there. Their favorite enemy has also been very drastically changed as well, and I'm going to mention it, I'm going to talk about it, but I'm going to save that for the end of the class ability portion of the video, because there's a lot to talk about with it, and I kind of want it to be like the main highlight, because again, it's one of the best things that they did for the class versus the 3.0 version. So we're going to come back to it, but I'm going to skip over it for now. Rangers still gain the track feat as a bonus feat at first level. They also gain wild empathy, which basically allows them to sort of commune with, not like verbally, but to sort of be able to communicate with and to influence the emotions of animals or wild creatures, and they do so by rolling a d20 and adding their ranger to it, and sort of using the rules for changing attitudes that you could find in things like diplomacy or intimidate. So again, really, really useful ability there. Works with the theme of the woodland, character that's good with animals and good with, just moving around in nature, which we're going to see some more stuff here for that as well. So really cool stuff there. At second level, this is another major change and another really welcome change to the Ranger class. At second level, they gain the combat style ability. So in second edition and 3.0, the Ranger was able to fight with two weapons as one of their primary class features. In 3.5, they actually have a choice because a lot of Ranger type characters have always been presented as exceptionally skilled at archery, something which wasn't really part of the Ranger class until Unearthed Arcana in first edition AD&D, and not really mentioned in second edition at all. And also, third edition didn't really lean or lend anything towards the Rangers being skilled archers either. But here we finally have the ability to choose between two-weapon fighting, which is the ability that Rangers have had historically, or archery. So if they choose the two-weapon fighting style, they get the ability to attack as if they had the two-weapon fighting feat, similar to 3.0. In 3.0, they were treated as if they had both ambidexterity and two-weapon fighting. But in 3.5, the ambidexterity feat was dropped and was essentially just put into the two-weapon fighting. So in 3.5, if you are fighting with two weapons and you have the two-weapon fighting feat, assuming that the offhand weapon is lighter than the primary weapon, or that they're both daggers, you get to attack with both weapons at a -2 penalty. Now, the thing I also like about this feature, and we'll see it with the archery one as well, because the archery gives you the ability to have rapid shot, which allows you to make two attacks instead of one. However, both attacks, again, suffer a -2 penalty. So they're very similar to each other, granting an extra attack at the level that you gain them, with both attacks suffering a -2 penalty. But you're gaining this at second level now, so it's no longer dropping your base attack. The penalty is no longer larger than your base attack bonus. Because in 3.0, at -2, which you gained at first level, the Ranger would actually effectively be attacking at a -1 plus their ability score modifier, which was not great. So here, it's a -2 penalty, but they don't gain the ability until second. So they still get to attack at their full ability score modifier plus any other enhancements that they might have. So I do like that ability. They also gain at third level the endurance feat. So endurance just gives them bonuses on certain skill checks or certain saving throws to avoid taking any type of damage or like lethal or not lethal, sorry, but non-lethal damage from things that are physically exerting yourself, such as forcing yourself to swim for extended periods, trying to hold your breath, forced marching for extended periods of time, or to even deal with extreme temperatures or things like starving or starvation or dehydration. So the feat gives you a +4 bonus on certain skill checks and saving throws related to that. It's a cool ability, not one that I think ever got a ton of use, but it works well with the idea of the Ranger being the sort of survivalist type of character, so I do really like that. At fourth level, they gain an animal companion. So I don't think they had this in any of the previous editions, and with the animal companion, you're basically... it's actually a druid ability that we'll take a look here really quickly at. We're not going to go into a great amount of detail with it, but the druid can choose a animal companion, and based on the druid's level, the animal companion actually gets certain improvements to it, so they can get extra hit dice. Their armor, natural armor, can be increased. They can gain bonuses to their strength and dexterity. Certain tricks they can do based off of like the animal handling skill, and even other special abilities like evasion or the ability to like share spells, which means that if they're within 5 feet of you when you cast a buff spell, they also gain the benefit of it, even if even if it was just a single target type of thing. So it's a really cool feature. The downside of the Ranger version is that he is considered to be a druid of half his level. So since he gains this at 4th level, he would have an animal companion that would gain the benefits of a 2nd level druid. At 8th level, they can also choose to take an alternate animal companion the way that a druid can. However, like the druid, if they choose one of these alternative animal companions, they would suffer a -3 penalty to their effective level when determining their bonus abilities, which would actually, for a ranger at 8th level, would drop it all the way down to the benefits of being just a first level druid. It's kind of neat that they get that option, but it's not really one worth taking overly because at maximum, you would be considered, your animal companion would be as good at 20th level for the ranger as it would be for a druid of 7th level. So, not so great there. But it's still, like I said, an interesting ability, and I like the fact that they gain the animal companions because it, again, works with the survivalist theme. They also gain spellcasting similar to 3.0, so that has pretty much not changed. They gain 0 spells at 4th level, and they can gain bonus spells based on having a high enough wisdom. Similarly to other spellcasting classes in 3.5 and as well as 3.0, they have to have a minimum ability score of 10 plus the spell level. So for the ranger to use their 4th level spells, they need to have a 14 wisdom. If they have a 10 wisdom or less, they don't gain any of their spells. So that is one thing to keep in mind when you are looking at your ability scores and how much you want to actually put a focus on spellcasting. As far as the actual spells available to them, they haven't changed that much. However, the Ranger in 3.0 gained Cure Light Wounds at 2nd level as a 2nd level spell, and then Cure Serious Wounds as a 4th level spell, but they didn't gain the in-between, which was Cure Moderate Wounds, which the 3.5 Ranger actually does. They do gain Cure Moderate Wounds as a 3rd level spell. There are a few other like new spells kind of thrown in there as well, but the spell casting for Rangers has never been that great. Unless you picked up the Spell Compendium, which might be the subject of a future video. I'm not going to really group that in with this one, because I think I'd rather talk about the book as a whole, as opposed to having to continuously reference it for spellcasting characters. But overall, their spellcasting has actually remained pretty much unchanged, except for, again, a slight difference in what spells are available to them. Now, at 6th level, the Ranger gains improved combat style. So whatever combat style that they took at 2nd level, they get an upgrade to at 6th. If you chose 2-up in fighting, you gain the improved 2-up in fighting, which you're still stuck with the -2 penalties, assuming that you're using a lighter weapon in your offhand. But what it allows you to do is to make a second attack with your offhand weapon with a -5 penalty to your base attack. So it works the same way as like the regular progression. So at 6th level, the Ranger with their primary weapon can make 2 attacks, one at +6, one at +1, plus any like modifiers or penalties sort of being applied to them. So with the offhand weapon, they would again just attack at the same bonuses and then apply whatever penalties that they need to, but they'd be able to attack 4 times at that level. 2 attacks would be at their highest attack bonus, and then the other 2 attacks would be at an attack bonus 5 less than their max. So basically that's just how it works. It just adds an extra attack on there. Now, if you chose the archery style, you gain the many shot feat. Now, many shot is kind of interesting in that it allows you to fire multiple arrows at the same time at a single target. So at the level that you gain this ability at, you would be able to fire 2 arrows at the same time. You use a singular attack roll. However, you do gain a -4 penalty overall on the attack. But again, it's a single roll, and if one hits, they all hit because, again, it's against the same target. They do damage technically separately, so if they, for example, if the opponent had some form of damage reduction, that would apply to each arrow individually. And if you were to score a critical hit, so if you roll a natural 20 and then confirmed the critical with your many shot here, only the first arrow would actually be multiplied. So it's an interesting feature, and I think it's sort of taken from like the Lord of the Rings where you saw Legolas fire multiple arrows at the same time. I'm pretty sure that feat was designed specifically because of that scene. I don't know the practicality, honestly, overall of the feat or of the feature, other than the fact that you're only having to make a single attack roll. And because even though it is a -4 penalty, it is technically better for like the secondary arrows. than it would be for using them just at their regular attack bonus, which would be at -5 for each extra attack that you would get off of your like highest attack bonus. So I guess it makes sense from that perspective. But yeah, I mean, to be fair, it is an ability that I used a lot. You also, when you gain extra, like your third and fourth attack, you can add a third or fourth arrow to that many shot, with each additional arrow giving you an extra -2. So if you're firing 3 arrows at the same time, it's -6 for a single attack roll with all of the arrows using the result of that attack roll. And when you're firing 4, it would be at -8. So again, it's better for the secondary attacks than it would be for the primary one. At 7th level, they gain the Woodland Stride ability. So Woodland Stride essentially allows them to move through natural terrain without any sort of impediments. They won't be slowed for like difficult terrain, like a thick underbrush, for example, and they won't take damage from things like thorns or barbs or anything like that, unless the foliage that they're moving through has actually been magically enchanted to do so. So it's just basically a way for them to move through, like I said, difficult natural terrain without taking any damage or without suffering any movement penalties. 8th level, they gain the Swift Tracker ability, which allows them to track at their normal speed without suffering any penalties on the survival skill check, which you would normally take penalties to. And if they were moving at double speed, they only suffer a -10 penalty as opposed to a -20. So even if they were doing a full-on run while trying to follow a set of tracks, it's still easier for them to do so than any other class. 9th level, they gain the Evasion ability. So Evasion, if they are making a reflex saving throw against an effect that allows them to save for half, like a Dragon's Breath weapon or certain spells or certain traps, if they succeed on the saving throw, they take no damage. If they fail on the saving throw, they still take the normal amount that they would for a failure. But this is, again, a really cool ability because the Ranger class also now has a good reflex saving throw. So I like the fact that they actually complemented that with the Evasion ability, and they gain it at a late enough level that it's not going to be quite as game-breaking as, say, what the Rogue gets, where they eventually get improved Evasion, which allows them to only take half damage even if they fail their saving throw. So I prefer the regular Evasion. It's all or nothing, which I kind of prefer to, half even on a fail, but that's a whole other topic for a whole other time. But I do like the fact that they gain the Evasion ability, similar to other Ranger class features like the 2-up in fighting, or it's the combat style, I should say. If they are wearing anything beyond light armor, they lose that ability. But again, they're not proficient in anything beyond light armor, so it's fine as far as the 3.5 Ranger is concerned. At 11th level, they gain Combat Mastery. So this is the ultimate version of their combat style. If they had chosen 2-up in fighting, they gained the greater 2-up in fighting. So there was 2-up in fighting, improved 2-up in fighting, and greater 2-up in fighting. And similar to improved 2-up in fighting, the greater version allows you to make a third attack with your offhand weapon. The first attack would be at your full base attack bonus. The second one would be 5 less. And the third one would be 5 less from the second one, or 10 less than the first. So, for example, the easy way to look at it, you gain it at 11th level. Your base attack bonus at 11th level is +11. The second attack would be +6, and the third attack would be at +1. So at 11th level, a Ranger that takes the 2-up in fighting ability can make 6 attacks per round, and they can get up to 7 attacks per round once they reach 16th level and they gain that 4th primary weapon attack. So the Ranger, if you took the 2-up in fighting style, you get a ton of attacks, which again, I'll talk about a little bit later on. If you took archery, you gain the improved precise shot feat as a virtual feat. So you don't actually gain any of these feats officially, but you are able to act as if you had them. Now, improved precise shot, essentially what it allows you to do is attack a target without them gaining any benefits of cover or concealment, unless it is total cover or concealment. So if it's like, 9/10 cover or 3/4 cover or like 80% or 90% concealment, they gain no benefit of that, and you can attack at your normal full bonus with no mischances or no modifications to their armor class. Also, if they are involved in a grapple, either as a grapple target or as the target grappling someone, if you were to attack them, you are guaranteed to strike the right individual, the one that you're aiming for. Otherwise, normally if a ranger or an archer or anyone uses a ranged attack against someone who is involved in a grapple, there is a chance that they could hit their ally instead of the enemy, but that is removed with the improved precise shot. So yeah, we'll talk about my feelings on how archery is treated versus the two-weapon fighting, but we'll save that for a little bit later. But that's just those are the abilities that you gain with the combat style mastery. At 13th level, the Ranger gains Camouflage. So a Ranger of 13th level or higher can use the hide skill in any sort of natural terrain, even if the terrain doesn't normally grant cover or concealment. So if you're just simply in the woods and you're trying to hide from someone, even if you're not like hidden behind a tree, you can just simply make a hide check to try to blend in. And then at, 17th level, they gain Hide in Plain Sight, which is sort of an improvement of Camouflage, which allows them to make the hide skill check in natural terrain. Even if they're being directly observed, they can just simply fade into the foliage and become hidden. Even if you're watching them do it, they're just that good at hiding at that level. So again, really cool set of abilities, but the main one I want to talk about here, and the most improved ability that the Ranger has in 3.5, has to be their favorite enemy. So just a little recap of the favorite enemy style class feature throughout all the previous editions. In first edition, the Ranger, if they were attacking a giant class enemy, which could be things like giants, ogres, trolls, ogre mages, goblinoids, so goblins, hobgoblins, bugbears, orcs, or even kobolds, the Ranger would add +1 to their damage roll for every level of Ranger class they had. So a 10th level Ranger would add +10 damage against one of those giant class enemies, which again, sort of almost paradoxically includes things like goblins and kobolds. In second edition AD&D, the Ranger has to choose a very specific enemy type. So it could be like, if they wanted it to be like goblins, it would have to be goblins. If they wanted it to be gnolls, it would have to be gnolls. If they wanted it to be giants, it had to be giants. It was much more narrowly focused ability. And instead of it adding to damage, they gained a +4 bonus to their attack roll. As well, they would have to try to attack their favorite enemy if they were found in a combat situation and they had difficulty getting along with their favorite enemy type, suffering a penalty to their reaction rolls against them. In 3.0, they actually get the multiple favorite enemies that they get to choose as they progress. Each time they gain a favorite enemy, they gain a +1 bonus to certain skill checks, as well as a +1 bonus on damage rolls. When the Ranger in 3.0 gained their next favorite enemy at 5th level, then the new one would have a +1 bonus, and any previously selected favorite enemy would see their bonus increase by +1. So at 20th level, your 5th favorite enemy would have a +1 bonus on the skill checks and damage rolls, and a +5 bonus against the first favorite enemy that you chose. So if someone had taken 20 levels of Ranger class, they had to decide if they wanted to choose a favorite enemy type at first level that they would gain the maximum benefit of later on in the campaign, or if they wanted to essentially sacrifice their highest potential bonus on damage to choose something that they're more likely to gain benefits against at the beginning lower levels and probably not fight. So if you chose goblinoids, for example, you would probably fight a lot of like goblin type enemies at lower levels, but by the time you get to like 20th level, you're probably not fighting regular goblins. So in 3.5, here we go. So the first thing is the bonus actually increases from +1 to +2, starting off as a base. So when you gain your first favorite enemy, you choose from the following list, which we'll read the list here in a moment. And you get to add a +2 bonus on bluff skill checks, listen checks, sense motive, spot, and survival checks against your favorite enemy selection. And you gain a +2 bonus on damage rolls. So the types that you can choose here As you can see, they actually expanded out the humanoid and outsider types. In 3.0, they just had an asterisk next to them, and then you had to choose something more specifically. Here, they actually give you the breakdown of what they are. So you've got aberration, animal, construct, dragon, elemental, fey, giant. And then for humanoids, you have aquatic, dwarf, elf, goblinoid, gnoll, gnome, halfling, human, orc, or reptilian. Then there's magical beasts, monstrous humanoid, oozes, and then for outsiders, there's air, chaotic, earth, evil, fire, good, lawful, native, and water, and then there's plant, undead, and vermin. So those are your favorite enemy categories. If you chose outsider, for example, and you chose something that could technically both be either, say, evil and chaotic, if you had both types selected for favorite enemy, you would only take the better of the two. So you don't get the double dip that way, but it is interesting to see the way that they classify the outsiders here by basically alignment, element, and if there are some creatures that are considered to be native outsiders, which again sounds almost like an oxymoron, but it is something that you can have. I think like Asimars, for example, are considered to be native outsiders if you were to play one or encounter one in D&D. Now, when you gain a new favorite enemy, so at 5th, 10th, 15th, and 20th, your new favorite enemy also gets that +2 bonus on the skill checks and the damage rolls. However, you also get an additional +2 bonus that you can assign to any of your favorite enemies, including the one that you just selected. So instead of having your first favorite enemy be the one that gets the most increases as you progress, now, if you're no longer fighting something that you chose as your favorite enemy at first level, when you gain your next favorite enemy, not only do you get the +2 bonus, but you can decide to put that additional +2 into that new favorite enemy. So if you chose goblinoids, for example, at first level, and by the time you reach 5th, you're not really fighting goblinoids anymore, but you do find that you are fighting giants more frequently, like ogres, trolls, or like, hill giants or stuff like that, you could take giant and you could put a +4 bonus total. So the 2 that you get just for choosing the ability and the additional +2 that's yours to put wherever you want. So this worked really well, and it was a really balanced way to do things because myself personally and most of the people that I know that played a ranger essentially always put the additional +2 into their newest favorite enemy. So at 20th level, their first favorite enemy would typically just have the +2 bonus, and then their second, third, fourth, and fifth favorite enemies would all have a +4 bonus on, which spreads out the damage a lot better over numerous creatures, as opposed to in 3.0, where their 20th level choice only gets a +1 against, and then all the previous ones, get an additional +1 until you get to that first favorite enemy with the +5. So I like this one a lot better. Now, again, you could also choose something. So, for example, if at first level you were fighting like a lot of undead, like zombies and skeletons, and then you moved on to fighting things like orcs by the time you reached 5th level, so you chose orcs at 5th, but then you started fighting undead again a lot, you could actually, again, retroactively put those bonuses into that first favorite enemy and crank that one up. So it was just a much more versatile version of the ability, and you could decide based off of what you've been encountering where that extra +2 bonus goes every time you gain the new ability. So again, just an awesome upgrade to the favorite enemy. And even if you only have the +4 bonuses for your second, third, fourth, and fifth favorite enemy, it's still so much better than +1 at your fifth and then +2 for your fourth favorite enemy and so on. So you no longer have to choose something at first level that you don't really expect to pay off until you get towards the end. You can still technically do that if you want, but there's not really as much incentive to do that with the 3.5 Ranger than there was with the 3.0 Ranger. So again, just overall a much better version of the ability, and I absolutely love it. So that is the default version of the Ranger class. I'm going to get to my review portion momentarily, but there are some alternate features in some other releases for 3.5 that we're going to take a look at here as well. And I'm going to look at them in the order that they were released in. So the first thing we're going to take a look at here is Complete Warrior. This was the first in the Complete series, which meant to offer some new classes and some new class options for things from the player's handbook, as well as, like I said, some new stuff, a ton of prestige classes, which we're not really going to get into, but some new like feats and other abilities here. So for the Ranger, we're going to take a look at, I think it's on page 13. So the Ranger has a variant version in the Complete Warrior book, which is a non-spellcasting variant. Now, the Paladin also gets non-spellcasting options. We're not going to look at the Paladin here today, but I do plan on doing a series on the Paladin class as well. But for now, we're just going to take a look at the Ranger. So if you take this version of the Ranger, you no longer gain spellcasting at all. It also means that certain magic items that require you to be able to cast the spell to use, like wands, for example, or scrolls, you no longer gain the ability to use those either. But you do gain some interesting features in exchange. So at 6th level, if you choose, and remember, even though you technically gain 0 spells, at 4th level, you don't actually gain your first real spell slot until 6th level. So at 6th level, if you don't have the spellcasting version of the Ranger, you gain the fast movement ability, which gives them an extra 10 feet to their speed. Again, it only applies when they're wearing light armor or no armor, as well as if they're not carrying anything of like a heavy load, for example. So they get the extra plus 10 movement as long as they're not encumbered and wearing heavy armor. So again, perfectly fine. The Ranger is not proficient in medium armor. It's interesting that they mention medium armor in here because it's not a proficiency that they have anymore, but I'm not gonna dwell on that too much. So fast movement, plus 10 feet as long as you're wearing light armor or less and not bogged down by carrying too much gear. At 11th level, you gain Nature's Blessing, so the Ranger can use a standard action to add a +4 bonus to their Constitution, Dexterity, or Wisdom score, and this ability is usable only once per day and lasts for 1 minute per class level. So at 11th level, you can give yourself a +4 bonus into either of those skills or any of those, not skills, but attributes, and it would last for 11 minutes. So if you chose Con, for example, a +4 bonus would give you a +2 hit points per level, so that would give you plus 22 hit points at 11th level, as well as a +2 bonus on your Fortitude saving throw. If you chose Dexterity, it would give you a +2 bonus on all of your attack rolls, as well as your Reflex saving throw. So some great stuff there. That's actually a pretty cool ability, and yeah, 1 minute per level. So interesting stuff there. At 13th level, they gain the Healing Touch ability, so once per day, a Ranger of 13th level or higher can use either Neutralize Poison or Remove Disease as a caster whose level is equal to 1/2 of the Ranger's class level. So at 13th level, they could cast it as if they were a 6th level character. So this one, not the greatest, I have to admit. Like, it's called Healing Touch, but you don't actually heal, you just negate things. So it would have been nice if they could have had the option to do something similar to like a Lay on Hands, for example, or even just like a Cure Light Wounds. But it's still, the ability to neutralize poison or remove disease is actually still pretty decent, I think, overall. And then at 16th level, they gain Freedom of Movement. So they basically can use Freedom of Movement on themselves once per day as a caster whose level is equal to 1/2 of the Ranger's level. So at 16th level, they can cast Freedom of Movement as if they were an 8th level spellcaster, which counts for things like duration. Freedom of Movement is also good because it allows you to move unimpeded through any type of terrain, as well as you could move at your normal speed through water, even if you don't have a swim speed. So overall, not a bad series of abilities for the Variant Ranger. The one thing that I will say is that a lot of these abilities are similar to spells that they can cast if they choose the spell casting. So I don't know how likely I would be to take the non-spellcasting version, but it is interesting that they at least do give them the choice, so I'll give them credit for that. In addition, the Ranger also gets a few new feats in this book as well, so we're just going to skip all the prestige classes because they're not my favorite part of 3rd edition or 3.5, but let's go to the feats section here. And if we take a look, there's a couple of feats that revolve around the Favored Enemy ability. So the first one that we're going to take a look at here is Favored Power Attack, and then they gain another one called Improved Favored Enemy. So For favored power attack, or favored enemy power attack, no, it's favored power attack. So it requires that you have a favored enemy ability, the power attack feat, and a base attack bonus of +4 or greater. Now, the benefit is with power attack, what you could do is you subtract a certain amount off of your base attack bonus, and then you apply that as extra damage. So you sacrifice accuracy for power in your swings. If you're using a one-handed weapon, when you use power attack, the amount that you subtract from your base attack, you add that exact same number to the damage from your weapon roll. If you're using a two-handed weapon, however, you actually get to add double that. So normally with power attack, if you were to take, let's just say you take 5, your 5th level, you take 5 off of your base attack. If you're using a two-handed weapon, you're dealing an additional +10 damage. Now with the favored power attack, what it allows you to do is if you use the power attack against a favored enemy, so any of your favorite enemies, you subtract the number from your melee attack rolls and add twice that number to your damage rolls. So that's with the standard one-handed weapon. So a ranger with favored power attack attacking one of their favorite enemies, if they were with a long sword now, instead of a great sword, if they were to take 5 off of their attack bonus, they would add +10 to damage. Now, if the ranger is using a two-handed weapon, they actually triple that number instead. So again, using the same numbers, if the ranger was using a two-handed weapon and power attacking for 5 against one of their favorite enemies, they would add an additional 15 points of damage. And now this is something that I actually would have used at the time, because when I took my archery version of the ranger class for 3.5, because I was already using a weapon that required both hands for my melee weapon, I would use a two-handed weapon to get the maximum amount of damage if I'm forced to use that melee weapon. So this is something I think that I would actually have used quite a bit if I was playing a ranger at the time that this book came out. So improved favored enemy requires the favored enemy ability and a base attack bonus of at least +5. The benefit is you deal an additional an extra 3 points of damage to your favored enemies. This benefit stacks with any existing favored enemy bonuses gained from another class. So yeah, if you were choosing your, at 5th level, for example, you took this, if you ended up gaining this feat thereafter, your favorite enemy type, the one that does normally +4 against, you'd be doing up to +7. And that first favorite enemy that only had +2 bonus on, you're now getting a +5. So it's an extra +3 on top of what you already get. So again, a really solid feat. You can only take it once, which makes sense. But this was another really good feat for the Ranger class. So those were the two that stood out the most when I was taking a look at the feats in this book. But kind of a mixed bag. Like the feats I think were really cool, really well done, and really useful for the Ranger class. The non-spellcasting version you could sort of take or leave. Again, a lot of the abilities that they gain are similar to spells. For example, the fast movement ability is similar, is not as good as, at least as far as overall numbers, as the Expeditious Retreat spell, which grants you an extra 30 feet of movement. The trade-off, though, is that that's a spell with a limited duration, whereas the fast movement is available all the time. So that's actually probably one of the more useful abilities that you're getting in exchange for giving up your spell casting. But even the ability to increase your dex, constitution, or wisdom score by an additional +4 for 1 minute per level, that's about the same as the spells that were similarly themed. So you had like Bear's Endurance, for example, would give you a +4 bonus on your constitution score, and I believe it lasted for 1 minute per level. That's kind of, and you could cast that multiple times if you had multiple spell slots as opposed to just once per day. I think that ability would have been better if it was a number of rounds per day equal to like 10 times your level, and you could split them up how you wanted to. But overall, I guess, not too bad. I probably wouldn't use the non-spellcasting version of the Ranger myself personally, but I absolutely would have used the feats that were in this book. Up next, we have the Races of the Wild. This was a series of books, Races of the Wild, Races of Stone, Races of Destiny, Races of the Dragon, and Races of Eberron. This was a series of books that basically kind of gave you a lot more detail into the life and society of some of like the Player's Handbook races. Each book also introduces at least one new race to play that's available to you, and it also has substitution levels for the races in this book for the classes that they're most closely associated with. So we do have the Elf Ranger, and I believe that starts on page 150, I think it's 155. All right, so 155, the Elf Ranger. Now, one thing to note about substitution levels here. For racial substitution levels, they usually give you 3 different options at 3 different levels. When you reach that level, you have to choose at that point in time if you want to take the regular version of the class or if you want to take the updated version, the racial substitution version. You cannot go back and change that later on, and you can't decide, so you can't decide that you don't want, say, the first level version of the class, and then later on decide that, oh, I do, and go back and change it. When you take a racial substitution level, and only when you take a racial substitution level, you don't gain the regular benefits from the class. You gain the specific ones that are listed on the chart. They may duplicate some of the more standard abilities, and then just have the one that's changed mentioned there as well. And also, you may end up rolling a different hit dice than you normally would when you gain any other level in the class. So for the Ranger, for example, they normally roll D8s, but for the Elf Ranger, for the 3 levels that they have for substitution, they have to roll a D6, and that includes first level. So a first level Elven Ranger will have fewer hit points than a first level Ranger of any other class, or even a first level Elven Ranger that doesn't choose the substitution feature. So what's the benefit of the substitution features? Well, let's take a look here. So the first thing is that the Elf Ranger actually gains 8 skill points plus their intelligence modifier for the levels that you choose the racial substitution. So 1st, 4th, and 10th, if you take the Elven levels for the Ranger class at that point, instead of adding 6 skill points for that level, you're adding 8 plus your intelligence modifier. And again, you multiply that by 4 at first level to max out the skills that you get when you first start. So you get more skills, which is good. At the trade-off, again, comes with the D6 hit dice. But also, your favorite enemy ability has changed. So you still get Track and Wild Empathy, so that hasn't changed. But instead of favorite enemy, it's now Elf favorite enemy. So it says here, an Elf Ranger's favorite enemy ability grants him a +2 bonus on Hide, Listen, Move Silently, Spot, and Survival checks used against creatures of the chosen type, and a +2 bonus on all weapon damage rolls. So that's pretty standard. However, if the elf chooses Humanoid Orc, Undead, or Servants of Lolth as favorite enemy, and Servants of Lolth includes Drow, monstrous spiders of any size, and Driders, that bonus is +3 instead of +2. And any time that you gain a new favorite enemy ability and you gain the extra bonus that you can put into any of your favorite enemies, if you put the bonus in the new version of the favorite enemy, like the Servants of Lolth, Orcs, or Undead, you get an additional +3. So, for example, if you put your first boost into Servants of Lolth, which you chose at first level as well, then you would be doing +6 instead of +4. At 4th level, the Elf Ranger can gain an Elven Hound companion, and they treat it as a normal creature as far as what they get for bonuses based off of the Druid's level, so it doesn't get affected the way that they would if they had chosen one of the alternate ones. The Elven Hound is on page 189, so let's take a quick look at it here. So 189 Elven Hound starts with 2d10 for hit dice. And yeah, a little bit hardier than most normal animal companions that you would gain. So again, that's pretty cool. Again, the trade-off, though, is that you're rolling only a d6 at that level if you decide to take the Elven Hound as an animal companion instead of any of the other ones that a druid could normally choose. And then at 10th level, the Elf Ranger gains the ability called Strongheart Slayer. So they gain a +4 morale bonus on will saves against spell and spell-like abilities of Drow and Driders, and a +4 morale bonus on fortitude saves against poison from monstrous spiders. This substitution feature replaces the standard Ranger's third favorite enemy. So you would forego getting that third favorite enemy for the bonuses on saves against spells or poison against sort of like the Servant of Lolth type of enemies. Overall, kind of not the best, I would have to say again. I don't mind the D6 hit dice because I do like the extra skill points that you get, again, sort of with the elven perspective, the longer lived, sort of trained in more things before they set out into the world. So I'm totally okay with that. And I have to say the first level version is actually pretty good overall of the racial substitution feature, choosing orcs, undead, or servants of Lolth being a bit of a broader category and getting an extra +3 bonus plus an additional +3 anytime you put a boost into that, I think is a really, really strong ability. The Elven Hound one is great if you are looking to use the animal companions. But we're about to look at something that actually replaces that, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Overall, though, it's just a slightly better animal companion, so I'm not quite so sure about that one. And the bonuses on saving throws, will saves against spells is okay. And the bonus on poison is also pretty decent. But I don't know if it's quite as good as giving up a whole favorite enemy and like the extra boost that you could put. I would almost rather, if I was like looking to go up against the Servants of Lolth, Drow, Driders, and monstrous spiders, I would honestly, at 10th level, I'd rather have +9 to damage rolls against them than a +4 bonus on saving throws. So I don't know. It depends on what you prefer, but honestly, I think that it's the first level substitution is the one that I would probably choose, and I don't think I would touch any of the other ones, unfortunately. But it's still, again, it's flavor. It sort of gives the Elven Rangers their own sort of different feel to them, which I think is great. It's just overall a little underwhelming, but it's still a cool premise nonetheless. And finally, we've got the Player's Handbook 2. Now, there's a ton of like prestige classes and other supplements that might have feats or some other things that might be useful for the Ranger. I don't want to get that deep into it in this video. I could always look at some prestige classes later on, but again, it's my least favorite element of 3.5, so I probably won't. But the Player's Handbook 2 also introduces some alternate class features. Okay, so here we go. So the Ranger. So you can find the expanded version of the Ranger, the Player's Handbook 2, at page 54. The first section here just gives you some themes for the Ranger class, but not really any like abilities, just sort of what makes sense for you to do if you want to have that kind of Ranger. But we do gain an alternate class feature here. So we get Distracting Attack, which replaces the animal companion ability that you would normally gain at 4th level. So this is a 4th level ability. You have to choose if you are using this when you gain 4th level, and you cannot retroactively go back and change that decision. But if you take this, you lose the animal companion, but you gain the following. So beginning at 4th level, whenever you hit an enemy with a weapon attack, whether melee or ranged, the enemy is considered flanked by you for the purposes of determining allies' attacks. So, for example, if you and a rogue ally attack the enemy, not only would you grant the +2 for flanking on their melee attack, even if you're attacking at range, which normally does not count towards flanking, but they would also gain the benefit of sneak attack. This flank addition lasts until either the enemy is attacked by one of your allies or until the start of your next turn, whichever comes first, and it's an extraordinary ability. It has no effect on creatures that can't be flanked. So it's a bit more limited in terms of like how often you get to use it, but it works really well in tandem with classes that rely on the flanked condition for benefits. Like again, the rogue is a really great one there. It only applies to the very next attack that goes against it, so you have to be kind of strategic depending on how you want to use it. But I think it's still, for me personally, I don't really like animal companions that much. So this is something that, again, I would probably choose, especially if there was a rogue in the party and we could work really well together, because I could be considered to be flanking from any angle, even at range, for at least one attack that the rogue can make. So again, some really, really cool stuff there. So that was my look at the 3.5 Ranger. There is one more thing that it slipped my mind when I was going through the class description, but it is definitely worth mentioning here, and that is the favored enemy damage in 3.5 isn't restricted against creatures that are immune to critical hits. That was something that was specified in the abilities description in the 3.0 Player's Handbook, but it's nowhere to be found in the 3.5 Player's Handbook. It just simply states that they study the creature type and learn how to combat it better, and it gives them an unspecified bonus type of damage to their damage rolls. So things like plants, oozes, constructs, and undead can now suffer the penalty or the actual damage that the favored enemy ability grants. In 3.0, they didn't take the damage, which basically meant unless you really wanted the bonus to skill checks against those types of enemies, they just were never worth taking as a favored enemy type, but they are in this version. So that was greatly improved once again. So a great upgrade to that ability on top of what I had already mentioned. I forgot about it as I was recording, so I'm just going to slip it in here at the end. And that brings me to my final thoughts and my memories of the Ranger class. So as I mentioned before, this was the class, looking at the Ranger is what really sold me on 3.5 once the book came out. And I want to believe that it also helped usher in the 3.5 rule set to the group that I was actually gaming with at the time, because my DM was still running 3.0, but he had also picked up a 3.5 Player's Handbook and DMG and was looking to integrate certain aspects of 3.5 into his 3.0 game, which included the ability for me to play the Ranger class from the 3.0 or 3.5 Player's Handbook, as opposed to the 3.0 one, which was pretty garbage. And actually, if you look at the channel's name, the Swiftbow portion of the name actually came from that first 3.5 Ranger, because them getting the rapid shot ability, I decided that, incorporating that aspect into the character's name, adding it as sort of like, not necessarily a tribe name, but like a title that they could gain, or a rank that they could gain within like the elven community. I just thought that like the Swiftbow portion of it sounded kind of cool, I guess. I don't know. I've never been one to know what's cool or not, but I liked it, and it's something that stuck with me all throughout from 2003 even until modern day. In fact, to take it one step further, Draven Swiftbow was the pre-made Elven Ranger that I played for the 2006 International D&D Game Day, where there was a pre-made Ranger class, and the person running the event would allow you to make certain changes if you wanted to, and I changed from the 2-up and fighting Ranger to the Archer Ranger, and I gave it the name Draven to go with the Swiftbow title because the characters weren't named, and that name again stuck with me again all throughout. This was 2006 until modern day. That's what I use for my email address, and that's what I use for my YouTube channel, which you're watching this video on. So the Ranger class has actually been pretty influential is into the person that I am now, sort of some of the identity that I have now. And it's interesting to look back and to think like how much a single character class redesign has impacted me. I had a lot of fun playing multiple Rangers throughout the 3rd edition era. I didn't get a chance to play a ton, but whenever I was a player from the time 3.5 came out, it was a Ranger that I would choose first and foremost, and I just loved the class to death. It was a perfect redesign in my opinion, and it went from the worst design class in 3.0, in my opinion at least, to the best design class in 3.5, and I think they did an amazing job with it. The archery option for the weapon style is definitely a great thing to be able to make that kind of choice. I will say that compared to the 2-up and fighting options, it's not quite as even in terms of what the class gets. Many shot, like I said, is good for your secondary attacks, but it also greatly reduces your initial roll overall. So while it means that if you hit with all of your arrows, it means that you're still going to have a harder time hitting overall. And the improved precise shot is okay, but I don't recall that ever being something that I was really thankful to have. Like ignoring cover and concealment is okay, and being able to fire into a grappled situation and not hit your party member is also okay. But that being the highest level ability, I feel does not compare to the 2-weapon fighting stuff where you get up to 7 attacks, 4 with your primary weapon and 3 with your offhand weapon. I will say the one thing about the 2-weapon fighting version of the Ranger, though, is in my experiences, if the player wasn't as good at tracking their bonuses, including situational bonuses or things that are given to them through buff spells, having 7 attacks in a round could really grind things to a halt. And you also have to consider that really even with those 7 attacks, after you get to like your 3rd and 4th attack in terms of the base attack bonuses, they're not overly likely to actually connect, meaning that you're just kind of rolling and hoping for like a nat 20 or, a number that's on the very, very high end to ensure that you're able to hit at those high levels with the high armor classes. So it's a mixed bag, but I do really like the fact that you were able to make the choice and be able to play the archery style of Ranger class that has been sort of referenced in other editions, but never really had anything mechanically that would really help them out, except for the Unearthed Arcana first edition book saying that, hey, you have to have a ranged weapon as one of your proficiencies that you choose at first level. And that was basically it. But the third 3.5 one, like I said, it's in my opinion, it is the best designed class from top to bottom of all the classes in the player's handbook. And the class has had a huge impact on me from the time that I first started playing it, even through till today in the video that you're watching. Now, as much as I love the 3.5 Ranger, there is room for improvement, and that's going to bring us to part 5 of this series when we take a look at the Pathfinder First Edition Ranger. Now, I've never really looked too deeply at that class because I only played First Edition Pathfinder once, and I don't think we got much beyond like 1st or 2nd level, so I never got to dive deeply into the Ranger class. But we're going to see what modifications Pathfinder made to the 3.5 Ranger and how it compares to the 3.5 counterpart. So I'm really looking forward to that video. Anyway, let me know in the comments below, what are some of your memories involving the 3.5 Ranger? Were you someone like me who loved the idea of the Ranger in 3.0 but not the execution, only to fall in love with the class in 3.5? Or did you have someone in your group that played Rangers regularly after the 3.5 version came out? Or did you have a dungeon master who was kind of sadistic and loved to use the bonus damage for favorite enemy against his players now that it's a lot better in 3.5? So let me know your experiences in the comments below. Thank you once again for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all next time. Until then, take care.